English translation 498th contact. Saturday, 31st July 2010, 14:16 hours.
Surprise, because I was not expecting you, my son. However, be greeted and heartily welcome.
Greetings, Father Edward, my friend. The reason for returning here already today is that I have to tell you a few things that you will have to pay attention to in the coming time, and that you will have to work out.
Then these are things that are only for my ears if I interpret your words correctly.
As usual, you are fine hearing. Yes, what I have to say should not be officially mentioned, because it is a matter of...
Your explanations are not exactly a reason for joy. But I will probably have to prepare myself for it, because nothing can be altered after all. And although it hits me deeply, I won't let anything show and I won't talk about it.
It's not pleasant for me either because I feel connected to you.
Never mind, dear friend, I now have the cognizance and should be able to deal with it. So, we don't have to talk about it any further, because dropping more words would only make the matter worse. Therefore, I would like to turn to other things and ask a question.
Of course.
Time and again, especially recently, I am asked about the Library of Alexandria, which was destroyed by a major fire, and in which about 800,000 valuable scrolls with scientific records were burnt. Many of the writings were snatched by the Vatican before the library was maliciously set on fire. What can you say about it?
As you know, Alexandria's library was the largest with the most handwritten records at that time. In fact, it housed around 800,000 very valuable scientific scrolls. The scientific handwritings, however, fell victim to an unprecedented wave of destruction during antiquity. Everything was destroyed in the 4th century by the delusion of the Christianity. This, when the aim was to destroy everything that did not fit into the Christian belief. These Christian belief delusion-based destructions took not only place regarding the Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt, but also everywhere in Asia Minor, in the direct Roman Empire and in Greece, etc., where as a whole all libraries were destroyed and burnt down. In Rome alone, there were about 30 public bibliothecas and a very large number of private libraries and collections of writings which fell victim to Christian delusion. That which altogether was completely destroyed in wide sections of Rome, Asia Minor, and Greece, and so forth, according to our annals, amounts to about 1,241,700 natural science scrolls. Many of these handwritten texts described very valuable medical cognitions and techniques, besides actual technical inventions, which, if these records and plans had been preserved, would have led to the human beings of Earth conquering the outer space and settling on other planets already more than 200 years ago. Furthermore, by the Christian destroyers, 2,028 and 300 scrolls with political, literary, and poetic written works were eliminated or stolen and incorporated into the new Christian church. All the works of antique academics and masters thus disappeared from public knowledge and fell into oblivion. Everything disappeared as if it had never existed, and just as if the Earth humans no longer knew how to use their thoughts, no longer gained cognitions, and no longer made inventions. And all this only because the mighty of the new Christian church let destroy, burn, and eliminate everything that could not be reconciled with their Christian belief delusion. Thus not only were all bibliothecas, collections and libraries of non-Christian culture radically made to disappear, but also all non-Christian temples, synagogues, houses of God, and houses of prayer were declared blasphemous and were just as completely destroyed as all the valuable old handwritings with all the very important notes for the progress and the development of the Earth humans. The scrolls were not only berated as godless and blasphemous, but it was also forbidden under severe punishments to read the recorded texts. Even the private homes were searched by the Christian henchmen, and if any scrolls were found during the search, they were burned publicly, and their owners held to account in an evil way. This also happened in the year 367 A.D. in Alexandria, when the local bishop Athanasius ordered such raids on houses, whereby bloody punishments were also carried out for non-Christian owners of writings, which partly also cost human lives. In the year 391 A.D. in Alexandria, even a deadly hunt against owners of non-Christian writings was brought into being, to which a larger number of human beings fell victim. In the year 409 A.D., Emperor Constantine issued a decree by which mathematical scientists were also punished with the death of incineration if they did not themselves publicly burn their mathematical notes and they did not renounce mathematics. Ultimately, only a few writings were preserved that were well hidden at the risk of the owners' lives. It was not until the 15th century that they were rediscovered, and it was not even 0.5% of what originally existed of what was destroyed by the Christian belief delusion and belief fanaticism. But also the remaining writings suffered a defeat. Because the Christian fanatics were, of course, still concerned about destroying the ancient, important knowledge they regarded as contrary to the Christian belief delusion.
The mighty ones of the new Christian church feared the knowledge recorded in the scrolls, like the plague and the devil, because they knew very well that their entire web of lies of their new religion would collapse like a house of cards, as a result of the public disclosure of all the important notes. All the cognitions captured in the writings, etc., were effective explosives for the elite of the new church, which would have blown up their entire web of lies. Therefore, the old writings of antiquity found back again were then also further destroyed, however no longer burned, because at that time the parchment was still expensive. Thus, the scrolls were abusively overwritten by monks in monasteries and painted with images of saints, etc., so that the old handwritings became unrecognizable. But I wonder why the antique writings reappeared at that time in the 15th century, and why the antique knowledge could not be completely destroyed by the Christian fanatics and henchmen and by the power hungry of the new church. I think it can only be because the Islam emerged as a new and powerful religion. Due to its belief, the writings that could still be found in relation to the antique knowledge must have been secured like a golden treasure, namely at that time when Alexandria was conquered by the Orientals.
The reason for this was indeed because of Islam, which appeared as another strong religion. When Alexandria was conquered, it was in the year 642 A.D. Kurper. Then all still findable writings of the antique knowledge were safeguarded. The knowledge still found, however, was studied and evaluated throughout the Orient. Consequently, a tremendous developmental boost emerged, through which the knowledge for centuries exceeded that of Europe, and thus the knowledge of Europeans by far. It was no earlier than the Crusaders who were able to get hold of the antique knowledge again, and unstoppably brought it to Europe as knowledge forbidden by the Church. Partly together with what had already been common in Rome and Greece, but was destroyed by the Christian belief delusion of the Church mighty.
Well, that's about how I imagined the whole thing. But something else again. You probably know what happened in Duisburg in Germany at the Love Parade, namely that 21 people died there. In my opinion, such meetings are criminal, if one considers that thereby always the danger exists that human beings lose their lives, such as by being trampled to death, die by alcohol orgies and hysteria, or are killed by brawls as well as by acts of terror, etc. I think that such mass gatherings of human beings, even on a smaller scale, should be banned. Since this is not the case, however, and there are again and again deaths or serious injuries at such or similar events, it is then cheap to blame only the organizers. In my opinion, everyone is guilty, both the organizers and the authorities and safety bodies, who allow this nonsense, but also the participants in such imbecility themselves. To this now my question, how do you handle it with small and large events, if those are at all taking place with you?
We also organize small and large events, whereby it is, however, not allowed to organize large events between buildings. Large events with more than 200 participants are only allowed on free and open grounds or in appropriate stadiums far away from the residential areas. Up to 200 persons events may be held in semi-closed premises outside the residential areas, whereby it is stipulated that there must be sufficient and comprehensively large escape possibilities, that is to say, exits and any safety in every respect must be given, so that even in the event of eventual accidents, etc., no human beings come to harm. And as far as accidents at such events are concerned, I know from the annals relating to events that no accidents have occurred for over 900 years as a result of the strict safety measures. We never have mass gatherings of human beings that build up agglomerations in dense form, but there is also no fanaticism and no acts of Gewalt, as is on Earth the case. For example, with football events and drinking bouts, etc., with us everything takes place within a rational and humane framework, which unfortunately cannot be said of the Earth humans at all kinds of events. Also, with regard to drugs and alcohol, no problems at all occur with us, contrary to how this is the case again and again in an inhumane manner with Earth humans on every possible occasion. Fanaticism and acts of Gewalt, as well as drug and alcohol abuse, indicate a lack of development in terms of the consciousness and the intellect, as well as the recognition and bearing of responsibility, something which must for once be clearly stated and recorded. Covered event buildings that can accommodate hundreds or thousands of visitors must be open on all sides and freely accessible, just as they also must be such that they can be freely left unhindered at any time. This also ensures that no crowding or panic can arise among the visiting participants. If necessary, separate and elevated stages will be constructed opposite the visiting participants or spectators, etc., on which speeches are held or performances and presentations are offered which serve for the joy and amusement, etc., of the participating audience or the spectators. For larger events, large viewing screens are also provided so that the game, the speaking person, the presentation or performance can also be seen and followed from a greater distance. If necessary, simple seats are placed on the floor, but they are not covered and may also not have rising rows of seats. However, there are also open and roofed event stadiums which have rising grandstands, that is to say, rising seating accommodations. Thereby, the roofs must offer the highest degree of certainty that they will not collapse. Likewise, the highest possible safety levels are prescribed for the rising grandstand seats, therefore only materials that guarantee all safety levels and withstand the highest weight pressure find application. In addition, the rows of seats are arranged in such a way that only 8 persons can be seated side by side in one row of seats, with a staircase as wide as the row of seats itself, and separating it sideways from the next row of seats on both sides of the rows of seats. Altogether, the staircases are designed in such a way that it is possible to at any time directly reach the open space from the rear to the center of the event venue. This is how all our large and roofed event stadiums are equipped. The number of rows of seats, rising one behind the other, is thereby just as restricted as the number of rows of seats next to each other. The total number is thereby determined by the size of the respective event stadiums, whereby it is stipulated, however, that the number of visitors is limited according to the size of the stadiums and may never be exceeded. And as far as the events that you have referred to is concerned, it has to be said, with regard to such events that predominate on Earth, that the whole thing corresponds to a complete lack of responsibility. Such events should not be allowed in the manner that has occurred, but should be organized in such a way that neither accidents can happen, nor alcohol can be consumed, nor deaths can occur. Anyone who merely endorses, participates in, organizes, or permits such events becomes guilty of death, accident, excess of drugs or alcohol on the part of the event participants. With that, I have to confirm your point of view.
Such safeguards should also apply all around the Earth. But something else. The year 2012 simply causes many human beings headaches, as they are afraid. Because all those idiots who connect the end of the Mayan calendar with a doomsday catastrophe prophesy the end of the world. To this end, the cycle of solar activity, which has so far failed to materialize and should have been noticeable for a long time, is also referred to. However, this activity only starts slowly, and that causes anxiety in many human beings. Can you in that respect perhaps give a short explanation in simple language, which will also be understood by laymen?
What you say about the cycle of solar activity is indeed true. Because inside the sun, a process of change takes place that affects not only the sun itself and its activity, but also the Earth, its moon, and the whole Sol system. Like the sun, the moon dies too and collapses to a certain extent. Regarding the process on the sun, the fact is that the active cycle is in a state of transformation, which leads to the fact that it radiates much less energy than is usually the case. The activity takes place to a much lesser extent than is usual, which can lead to various effects on the Earth and which can stretch over decades. Such an effect can be, for example, that a worldwide cold period of many years unfolds, or a solar storm can occur, which hits the Earth with tremendous intensity as an electromagnetic storm. This would then have an unimaginable impact on Earth's infrastructure, because the magnetism could, under certain circumstances, cause all communication and navigation systems and the entire function of all satellites and electrical power stations, as well as all transmission networks of all kinds worldwide, to collapse. Because everything would be overloaded to the greatest possible extent. In today's age of mechanization, the effects would therefore be catastrophic, which would also be the case if a cold period of several years were to break out, if there were to be radical changes worldwide, and if famines as a result of harvest failures, etc., were to occur. And if the last winter with its great cold and also the present cold summertime is taken into account for explanation, then this could be a sign of an unusually cold time, which announces itself by the slowed down and changing solar activity. But this is not yet certain, because the activity can also suddenly increase and bring, at least for the years 2012, 2013, and 2014, enormous magnetic storms, which, as I already said, could cause catastrophic consequences on Earth for both mankind and nature. These would then have many times worse effects than the last enormous solar storm in the year 1859, which hit the Earth and already at that time caused the world communication network to collapse. In the present time, when the still very vulnerable forms of technology in terms of communication, navigation, entertainment, medicine and information, etc., which, as you once rightly said, are still in their infancy, such a breakdown would be particularly serious because all forms of this Earth-human technology are still extremely vulnerable and sensitive. And if this breakdown scenario would crash on the Earth by enormous solar storms, then true gigantic currents of electrons would rain down on the Earth from the sun, whereby electric currents would be caused, that is to say, induced. This means that currents and voltages in electrical conductors would be generated by moving magnetic fields. This could result in short circuits in a continuous sequence, and thus in many years of power failures, etc. Assuming this scenario were true, the entire food and drug industries, water supply, and worldwide communication would come to a standstill. However, what I am here saying and explaining does not correspond to any prophecy or prediction. Instead, the whole only reveals possibilities that may become reality under certain circumstances if either one or the other arises. The coming years will show what is really going to be, but we have not researched them foresightedly, hence I have in this respect also no predictions to state.
What you have explained is completely enough to understand everything. What is perhaps also worth mentioning is the fact mentioned in the contact report's conversation with Quetzal, Volume 5, 219. Contact report of 16th June 1987, page 361, and conversation with Ptah, Volume 7, 251. Contact report from the 3rd of February 1995, pages 328-340, that the SOL, that is to say our system sun, is a dying star. The symptoms of dying of our sun are, among other things, that it is steadily becoming smaller, thus shrinking, but also that it is undergoing ever more internal physical transformations and exhibits weaker activities. If I remember correctly, we have also talked privately about these things, whereby you said that the earthly astronomical and astrophysical scientists have fallen for a huge erroneous assumption, with their estimate that the sun would still have a lifespan of 5 to 5,500 million years. In reality, I remember you saying, the remaining lifespan of our sun would be only 1.5 thousand million, or at most, 2.5 thousand million years.
That is correct. I have given these details in accordance with our very precise clarifications and the cognitions attained.
Thanks. Recently we talked about the stromatolites from which the material life emerged. However, what we have said does not explain that the stromatolites too must have originated from some life forms.
Of course this is correct, because the origin of the stromatolites can be found in other original life forms deep inside the Earth. We are talking about tiny life forms that have existed since your times in extreme inner Earth conditions deep in the planet. Because they represent extreme life forms, they will be called extremophiles by earthly scientists. Of course, these tiny bacteria and other microorganisms have their own specific origin again. But it was only through the extremophiles that marine life and thus also stromatolites, and from them the actual life in the waters, their shores and on the land could develop. But now it is time again because I have to go about my duties. Be well, dear friend Edward.
Then bye and see you, Ptah, my friend.